I used to believe that the strength of a marriage lay in the quiet, unspoken moments, the shared glance over morning coffee, the warmth of her feet brushing mine in bed, the way her voice softened when she said my name. We had 15 years of those moments, 15 years of what I thought was unwavering trust, mutual respect, and a love that aged like wine, stronger, fuller, deeper. Her name is Claire. She's a lawyer, sharp, composed, and as charming as she is meticulous. I always admired her mind. She could walk into a room and command it without raising her voice. And when we met, that energy drew me in like gravity. We married in our late 20s, young professionals on the rise. I was building a tech consulting firm from the ground up, and she had just joined a prestigious boutique law firm downtown. Our life together looked perfect from the outside. The kind people envy quietly at dinner parties. Big home in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Max, long vacations in Tuscany and Aspen, and a circle of friends who all said the same thing. You two are the dream couple. We had our routines, Sunday night pasta, monthly date nights at that little French bistro on 5th, anniversary trips, never missed one, and even after all those years, she still kissed me before bed. Always. It was so consistent I came to believe it meant we were unshakable. I was wrong. The first sign was so small I almost laughed it off. Claire had always been punctual, obsessively so. But one Thursday evening, she came home almost an hour late. No text, no call. When I asked, she casually said she was stuck in a deposition and her phone died. It was believable. She's a lawyer. Those things happen. I remember brushing it off with a joke. They still make phones that die? And she smiled, kissed me, and moved on. But the seed had been planted. A seed I didn't know would grow into something much darker. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became more erratic. Late nights at the office, more phone calls that she took in the other room. She started locking her phone. Claire had never done that. She was always an open book type of woman, and we had never been the couple who needed passwords from each other. I had nothing to hide. I thought she didn't either. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe my mind was conjuring ghosts out of shadows. I even mentioned it to our friend group during one of our wine nights, half joking, half testing the waters. Claire's been acting a bit different lately, working late, on her phone a lot. Emma, her best friend and a close friend of mine too, laughed and waved it off. She's probably prepping for trial. You know how she gets. Don't go getting all Lifetime movie on us. They laughed. I smiled. But inside, I felt that sick twist of doubt. I checked her calendar once, just once, and saw a work trip scheduled for a Friday to Sunday retreat in Napa Valley. A strategic partner conference, she said. Very formal sounding. But when I looked up the event online, it didn't exist. That was when something shifted. The doubt became suspicion. And that suspicion became obsession. I didn't tell Claire I'd looked up the conference. I didn't confront her, not yet. If I was wrong, I'd be accusing the woman I loved of something unforgivable. But if I was right, I needed more than a hunch. I needed proof. I started small. I checked our shared credit card statements. Her usual charges, Starbucks, Uber rides, dry cleaning, were all there. But there were new ones too. A charge for a wine tasting room in Sonoma. A boutique hotel reservation at the Violet House. Definitely not a chain, and not the kind of place you'd go alone on a business trip. Still, I said nothing. Then came the gala. Claire and I had been invited to a legal aid charity event through her firm. It was one of those black tie affairs at the old museum downtown. Live jazz, champagne towers, donors in tailored suits and dresses that shimmered under crystal chandeliers. I had gone every year for the past 5 with her. But this time, she said they were limiting +1s due to space, and only senior partners' spouses could attend. Honestly, she said, brushing on lipstick as she stood in front of the mirror, it's going to be so boring. You're not missing anything. I'll just smile, shake hands, and sneak out early. She kissed me on the cheek and left in a swish of perfume and silver satin. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made it perfect. Emma had texted me 2 days before, out of the blue. You free Friday night? I think you should come to the gala. Bring a friend. Don't say I told you. That message hit like a cold wind. Emma had always defended Claire, but now something had shifted in her tone, something cautionary. I dressed in my best navy tux and went with a college buddy, posing as his +1. We slipped in through the side entrance, and I kept to the shadows near the balcony on the second floor, where you could overlook the entire main hall. I scanned the room. Waiters weaved between guests with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Laughter floated up in elegant little bursts. Claire wasn't hard to find. She stood near the champagne fountain, radiant in that silver gown, hair swept into a chignon, smile effortless. She was laughing with someone. A man. He wasn't from her office. I would have recognized him. He was younger, maybe early 30s, tall, confident. The kind of guy who looked too comfortable with her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as they moved through the crowd. I watched them step out to the side garden together. My breath felt cold in my throat. I followed, careful and quiet, moving along the outer edge of the garden path, behind the line of hedges. The moonlight caught their faces just enough. I could hear everything. "He doesn't suspect anything," she said, her voice clear, sharp, not a hint of guilt. He pulled her closer. "Good. You're doing great. It won't be much longer now." And then they kissed, slow, familiar, like it wasn't the first time. That moment cracked something open inside me. Not just the betrayal, it was the calculation. The way she spoke of me like I was a variable in some equation she was solving. I left before they could see me. I remember driving home numb, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to the world. Emma called me the next morning, her voice low. "You saw them, didn't you?" I didn't ask how she knew. She sighed. "I'm sorry. I couldn't keep covering for her. I didn't know it had gone this far." "What do you mean this far?" There was a pause. Then she said it. "They're not just having an affair. They've been planning something about your company. I don't know everything, but Claire mentioned shared leverage and transferring shares. I thought she meant something innocent at first. I was wrong. Something about those words set fire to my blood. She wasn't just cheating. She was trying to steal from me." Thomas wasted no time. The next morning, a courier served Claire the divorce papers while she was in her office. I didn't have to witness it. I imagined the sharp intake of breath, the way her pride would prevent her from showing shock in front of her colleagues. But later that day she called me. I let it ring. She tried again. Left a voicemail. "Can we talk? Please, just once. I didn't mean for it to go this way." I didn't respond. It was the first boundary I set after 15 years of unconditional trust. Silence. 2 days later, her lawyer contacted Thomas. A name I recognized, Jonathan Pierce. Sleek, high-powered, expensive. I'd seen his name on real estate billboards and celebrity divorce headlines. Claire was going for the kill, but Thomas was ready. We met in his office the night before the first hearing. He laid everything out like a general preparing for war. "Her team's going to come at you hard. Emotional abuse, controlling behavior, fabricated patterns to support a claim for spousal support. But we have the messages, the PI reports, and the prenup. This isn't just a defense, it's a full court offensive. The prenup was our foundation. Drafted 15 years ago, when I had just started my business and she was still an associate. It included a clause neither of us thought much about at the time, a bad faith clause. If either party committed proven infidelity and attempted to conceal assets or sabotage the other's holdings, the guilty party forfeited any claim to shared business assets or spousal support. She signed it. I signed it. And now it would decide everything. In court, Claire tried to play the part of the wounded spouse. Her lawyer painted her as neglected, emotionally isolated, forced into a corner. Claire even cried during her statement, talked about feeling invisible in her own home. The judge nodded sympathetically. For a moment, I worried it was working. Then Thomas stood. "I have evidence, Your Honor," he began, "that directly contradicts Mrs. Merritt's testimony. Multiple pieces, in fact. Photos, messages, emails, and financial records proving a sustained extramarital relationship. And, more importantly, a coordinated plan to divert Mr. Merritt's business assets through a third party, namely, Mr. Nathan Bell." The courtroom shifted. Claire's face froze. I watched as her lawyer tried to recover, object, spin. But the weight of truth had finally landed, and it was suffocating. Thomas continued, calm, precise, surgical. "We also have correspondence between Mrs. Merritt and her friend Emma Doyle, where Mrs. Merritt discussed leveraging false emotional abuse claims to strengthen her financial position in the divorce. He held up printed screenshots. And finally, we submit the signed prenuptial agreement, page 13, clause C. He looked directly at Claire, where Mrs. Merritt agreed to forfeit any claim to business assets or spousal support in the event of confirmed infidelity and asset manipulation. The judge read the documents in silence. Then she looked at Claire. "Do you have a response to this evidence?" Claire didn't speak, not a word. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She just sat there, her mask finally crumbling, exposed under the fluorescence of truth. The gavel came down, hard, cold, final, judgment in my favor. Claire was awarded none of my company, no spousal support. The house, mine. The vehicles, mine. Everything I had built, protected not just by paper, but by the integrity I had lived with throughout our marriage. She walked out of that courtroom smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not just defeated, unraveled, and I felt nothing. Not victory, not relief, just a quiet release. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. The legal ruling was swift in execution. Within 2 weeks, the court issued a formal division of our assets, and Claire's lawyer, clearly eager to cut his losses, sent over her signed acceptance. No appeals, no disputes, just silence, stapled and notarized. It was poetic, really. The house we'd designed together, from the slate tiles she obsessed over to the backyard pergola I built with my own hands, mine. The vacation property in Sedona we rarely used but always bragged about, mine. Every share of my company, Merit Digital Solutions, mine. And Max, our golden retriever, who never left my side once she moved out, also mine. Claire moved into a furnished rental downtown, a one-bedroom unit in a sterile glass tower, the kind of place you choose when you don't plan to stay long, or when you're too embarrassed to unpack your past. Emma told me she barely spoke to anyone in the weeks that followed. She didn't return texts, stopped showing up at firm events. She even took a leave of absence from her job. I didn't gloat, I didn't send a message or even acknowledge the fallout. There was no part of me that felt like rubbing her face in the consequences. I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to get my life back. But karma, I've learned, doesn't need a witness. I found out a few things after the divorce was finalized. 1. Nathan had ghosted her, completely. Thomas's investigator called to update me out of courtesy. Seems your boy skipped town, closed his consulting firm's office, deleted all his social profiles. We traced a wire transfer from Claire's trust account to a Cayman bank. He bled her out and vanished. The irony was a kind of divine cruelty. She had tried to manipulate me with a man who was manipulating her the entire time. 2. She'd taken out a second mortgage on the Sonoma property, behind my back, to fund Nathan's business expansion. That property now had liens on it, and since it had been in her name, to shield it from scrutiny, she was stuck with the debt. And 3, Emma came clean. She told me the full story. Claire planned the entire thing for over a year, she said, sitting across from me in my kitchen one quiet afternoon. Nathan convinced her she was entitled to more, that she deserved better. She stopped seeing you as a person, Liam. You were a target, a wallet, a stepping stone. I just nodded. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. I should have said something sooner, Emma added, guilt clouding her voice. You did when it mattered, I said, and for what it's worth, you're the only one who did. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You didn't deserve any of it. Funny thing is, I didn't cry, not once, not during the confrontation, not in court, not after. I think some betrayals go so deep that your soul skips the tears and heads straight for the scar tissue. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, but free. I started changing things after that. I repainted the bedroom, changed the sheets, sold the expensive wine fridge Claire insisted we needed but never used. I started walking Max twice a day instead of once. I went back to the gym. I called old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. And one night, I sat at the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and deleted the last photo I had of us together. That little symbolic act felt more real than the courtroom. Claire called me one last time. I answered. Her voice was soft, measured, no venom, no fake tears, just emptiness. I just wanted to say, I didn't expect you to fight back. I didn't expect you to betray me, I said. Guess we were both wrong. A long pause. Do you hate me? I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window into the darkness that used to terrify me, but now just felt clean. Quiet. No, I said finally. I don't hate you, but I don't forgive you either. Another silence. Then she whispered, I lost everything. I thought about that, about how much she'd gambled, about how easily she'd thrown away the life we built for something as hollow as greed. No, I said. You lost me. Everything else was just collateral. And I hung up. After that final call, Claire disappeared from my life for good. It was like a curtain dropped. The play was over. I was no longer part of her narrative, and she no longer held a place in mine. But the echoes lingered, especially in our social circle. At first there was confusion. People who had once idolized our marriage, friends, neighbors, colleagues, couldn't believe what had happened. Some tried to stay neutral. Others reached out to me quietly, unsure of what to say. But then the truth started to seep in. Emma, ever loyal, ever brave, shared what she knew with a few trusted friends. Not to gossip, not to shame, but because people were asking, and lies, when confronted with truth, dissolve quickly. Claire's social capital evaporated almost overnight. Her absence at events became a subject of murmured curiosity. Then a few brave souls started asking, what really happened? I didn't offer details. I didn't need to. People knew what mattered. I stayed, she didn't. I built, she tried to destroy. I gave, she took. Even her firm, prestigious, competitive, cutthroat wasn't immune. Word got out. Not officially, of course, but whispers have weight in those circles. Her request for a promotion to junior partner was quietly declined. Eventually, her leave of absence turned into an extended sabbatical. And then, she was gone. Rumor had it, she moved to Seattle to start fresh. Took a consulting gig. Changed her last name. She had to. In our city, her reputation had burned to the ground. But justice, I've learned, isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence, like missed calls, like being erased from the very life you tried to hijack. As for me, I thrived. My company exploded. 2 new contracts from major clients, one of whom said, half-jokingly, "You've got a killer instinct. You've been through some fire, haven't you?" Yeah, I had, but I didn't let the fire turn me bitter. I used it. I rebuilt my life slowly, intentionally. No quick rebounds, no reckless decisions. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I refused to carry her damage into the next chapter of my life. I kept Max close. Funny how a dog can be your anchor when the world splits open. His loyalty reminded me daily that trust can still exist, even when it's been shattered. Emma and I stayed close, closer than before. There were moments between us, quiet ones, where I wondered if something more was growing. We never forced it. We let time do what time does, heal, reshape, reveal, and it did. 6 months later, Emma and I went for dinner. No expectations, no heavy conversations, just laughter, good wine, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Near the end of the night, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled. I finally put down the weight. She nodded gently. "You deserved better." "I know," I said, "and I'm finally ready to accept it." And that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to bury you. If you face it head on, if you take the truth and walk through the storm, you come out the other side clearer, cleaner. I lost a marriage, but I found myself, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.